We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Amud Aleph from Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 30a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara said that it's actually Rebbe Lazar who holds that when you have an ownerless boar, the person is potter, the person does not have to pay. And the Gemara now asks, but if that's the case, if that's Rebbe Lazar's opinion, but didn't Rebbe Lazar say Mishum Rabbi Yishmael v'chulu? Didn't Rabbi Yishmael say in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, as Rashi says, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Shnei Devarim Einon B'Reshuso, that there are two things that are not really in the possession of a person, but the Torah makes it as if they are a possession, and those were chametz on Pesach, and also a boar B'Reshus Haravim, meaning to say an ownerless pit apparently is, the person is obligated to pay, he is chayiv, the Torah puts it in his Reshus even though it's not in his Reshus, and so therefore it seems to be a contradiction. The question is, when you have a boar that was made hefker, is Rebbe Lazar going to say chayiv or is he going to say potter? And the Gemara answers to that, Lokash, it's not difficult, hadi day, hadi rabbi. One is his own opinion, and one is the opinion of his Rebbe, meaning Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, he said that if you have a boar, even if it's ownerless, you're going to be responsible because the Torah puts it into your Reshus, but that was only in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, but he himself holds your potter in that situation. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, and this is the Mishnah we quoted from this Mishnah on the previous Amud. The Mishnah says, Hashofech mayim b'Reshus Harabim, if somebody pours out water in Reshus Harabim, v'huzak b'hanacher, and somebody else is damaged by that water, chayav b'nizko, he's chayav for those damages. Hamatznias hakotz v'esazachuchis, if somebody puts a coats, a thorn, or some kind of glass, again in the Reshus Harabim, v'hagodres gidro b'kotzim, or somebody has a fence that's made out of thorns, v'geder shenafel Reshus Harabim, a regular fence of stone that falls into Reshus Harabim, v'huzku b'hanacher, and again other people are injured by these things, chayav b'nizkan, the person is chayav for all of the damages. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav says, Lo shanu ela denitnefu kela b'mayim. When the Mishnah says that if a person spills water in the Reshus Harabim and it causes damage, he's chayav, that's talking about if the person's clothing become dirty from the water. It's that kind of damage that we are referring to. Aval hu atzmo potter, but let's say the person himself becomes injured because he slips on the water, karka olam hezikaso, so there he's going to be potter in that case. The person who spilled the water is potter because it's really the earth that is causing the damage. The water is indirectly causing the person to slip, but it's the earth that's causing the damage, and therefore the person that poured the water is going to be potter. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Huna l'Rav, Rav Huna says to Rav, Lo yehei ala karifsho, in this case of pouring the water out, it should be no different than if he poured his filth out into the Reshus Harabim. In that situation, he'd be responsible for all kinds of damage, whether it's damage to the clothing or to the body, and the same should be true over here. Rashi explains, Lo yehei ala karifsho hamashlich zivlo b'Reshus Harabim. If somebody throws his manure into Reshus Harabim, milo mechayev kilo hefkiro, wouldn't he be chayev on all kinds of damage in a situation where he didn't make it ownerless, where he was still the owner? Hachanami riv shehu da'aske, it's exactly the same here. It's a situation where it's his filth which is causing the damage. Shenis arvu hamayim v'offer, because what's happening is the water is mixing with the dirt. V'nasetit, the whole thing is turning into mud. V'shalohu, and it all belongs to him. Midemuki labatin of kalim, because we said he's responsible for the damage to the clothing. If it was bor, then he wouldn't be responsible for kalim. You don't pay for kalim by bor. Mechalal de lo afgre, it sounds like it's not hefker. It sounds like it's in the category of shore. The habor lo chayav kalim, because when it comes to bor, there is no chayav on kalim. So essentially what Rav Huna is asking Rav is that what really happens here is the water turns to mud. The mud and the water, that is the earth we're talking about. It all belongs to him. He should be responsible on all kinds of damage that happen in this case. And the Gemara continues, Misavrit delotamu maya. Rav says to Rav Huna, do you think we're talking about a case where the water is not absorbed and that whole earth becomes mud? That's not what's happening over here. Biditamu maya, we're talking about a situation where the water is absorbed. Essentially, the idea seems to be that it's slippery enough that it causes the person to fall, but it's still considered karka olam hazikah, so the damage is happening from the earth. It's not happening from what the person spilled, and that's why it's only going to be you're only going to be responsible for the damage to the clothing, but not to the person's body. Rashi explains, Misavrit alotamu maya el niskansu v'nasu refesh. Do you think that what happened is that the water gathered and it turned into this mud? That's not what happened. B'detamu maya v'nivlu kamar. We're talking about when the water finished and absorbed. V'yein kan refesh. You don't have that it turned into refesh. It didn't turn into filth, and that's why there's this distinction. You're responsible for the clothing, but not for the person's body. And the Gemara continues, V'tarti lamali, but if that's the case, why do we have the exact same teaching two Mishnayos in a row? Rashi says, V'tarti lamali lashminan b'masis and tin of kalim. All you're really teaching us is this concept of the person's clothing becoming ruined, and this other person is responsible since he spilled the water into the Reshus Harabim. V'tanina leil, that's exactly what we said before in the Mishnah. Nishbur akado b'Reshus Harabim, that if a person's kad, if his jug breaks in Reshus Harabim, v'hoch l'gechad b'mayim, and someone slips on the water, v'uk marav nami b'delo hifkir. And Rav said specifically, we're talking where it's not ownerless. Uvatin of kalim, when we're talking about the ruining of the clothing, it seems to be the exact same case twice. Why do we need the same case twice? And the Gemara answers, Chada b'yemos hachama v'chada b'yemos hageshamim. The Chiddush is one time we want to teach it in the summer season, and one time in the rainy season, in the winter season. The Tanyas we learned in a Brayso, Kol elu sha'amru poskin bevosein v'gorfin morusein b'yemos hachama ein lehen reshus. All of these cases where people will open up their gutters into the Rishus Harabim, or their cave water, they'll spill it out into the Rishus Harabim. In the summertime, there's no permission to do that. But in the rainy season, they actually have permission to do that. But even though there is permission, if there is a damage, they have to pay. Like in this case, even in the rainy season, the person will have to pay for any damage that happens to people's clothing. Rashi says, and it's to teach us. Even though they had permission, but if the damage is done, they have to pay. These are cases that the Chacham allow a person to do this, but again, even though there is Rishus, you do have to pay for damages. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Hamatznias hakotz v'chulu. Again, if a person puts a thorn, or a person puts a glass in the Rishus Harabim, it causes damage. Or the Mishnah said, let's say a person has a fence of thorns, and that causes damage, the person is chayiv. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo shanu ela mafriach. This is only true by mafriach. As we said on the previous Amud, that means that the thorns are sticking into the Rishus Harabim. Aval metzamsem lo. But when it comes to metzamsem, let's say it's all in his Rishus, it doesn't stick out into the Rishus Harabim, the person would not be responsible in that case. The Gemara says, my time a potter. Now, what's the reason why you're potter in that case of metzamsem? Amar Ravacha Breder Ravika. Ravacha, the son of Ravika, says, Lefishein darkon shel bnei adam lischachech b'ksalim, because it's not normal for people to rub up against the wall, even if the person, the area of his yard was made ownerless, so to speak, that people are allowed to walk there, just like they're allowed to walk in the Rishus Harabim, but it's not normal for them to walk right up against the wall, and therefore he's not responsible for that kind of damage. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Hamatzniya kotzosav uzuchuchyosav l'soch kosel shel chaver. If a person takes his thorns and his glass and he puts it into the wall of his friend, uva bal kosel v'sasar kosel, and then the owner of the wall comes and he destroys the wall, v'nafal Rishus Harabim v'ziku, and it falls into Rishus Harabim, and these thorns and this glass, they cause damage. Chayev hamatzniya. It's actually the person who put those things in the wall that's going to be obligated to pay. He is responsible. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo shanu ela b'kosel ru'ua. This is only true by a kosel ru'ua. That means to say that it's a wall that is not a strong wall, so the person should have realized that that wall was going to be taken down. Aval b'kosel bari, but by a healthy wall where the presumption is it's going to remain standing, hamatzniya potter. So in that case, the person who put those items there is potter. V'chaye bala kosel, and the owner of the wall is the one that will be responsible. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravina says, Zos omeres, this proves, hamechasa boro b'dolya shel chaver. Let's say a person covers up his pit with the pail of his friend, uva bal dali v'not al dolyo, and then the owner of the pail comes and takes away the pail. Chaye bal habor, so the owner of the bor is going to be responsible. He should have realized that that would be taken away, just like a person should realize that a wall that is not a strong wall is going to be taken down. And the Gemara says, Pshita, well, isn't that obvious? Of course, the person should realize it might be taken away. And the Gemara says it's not obvious. Ma'u detema, because what might you have said? Hasam hu delo have yadale delode. There, he didn't know who he was. He couldn't have let him know what was going on. Aval but over here, the yadale, where he knew him, havale lodo, he should let him know. Kamash malan, that's what it's teaching us, that these are identical cases. And Rashi explains, Chaya balabor, the owner of the pit, will be responsible, kedamrinan b'matzniya kotzosav, like the same logic by the person who put the thorns in the wall, dahainu bor b'kosel rushal chavero. It's the same idea. It's like you're using the wall that's for sure going to be taken down. V'sasar that's kosel, you should realize he was going to take down his wall. The chayev hamatzniya, the person who put it there, is chayev. V'hachanami, and here also, iboile lasuke adaita shezayitol as dolyo. The owner of the bor should have realized that this other person is going to take away his pail, and so therefore he's responsible. And so the Gemara spells Pshita, that's obvious. That's exactly the same case. Umayashmin and Ravina, what's Ravina teaching? Again, in both cases, in one case he has to realize the wall might be taken down, in the other case he has to realize the pail might be taken away. And the Gemara says, no, it's not exactly the same. Ma'u detema, what might you have said? Lo dami, they're not comparable. Because it could be that in the situation of the wall, the reason why the person who owns the wall is not responsible, he didn't know the person who put the thorns there, There was no way that he could let him know, get your thorns out of here. He didn't know him, and that's why the Baal Kosel is going to be patur. Aval Baal Hadali, but when it comes to the owner of the pail, the Yadal Baal Abor, he knows who the owner of the pit is. Iboyle Lo Doi, he should let him know. Shunotelas Dalyu, he should let him know, I'm taking away my pail now. Ashmin and Ravina, but Ravina says no, that's not true. The Lav Hainu Taima, that's not good reasoning, and rather these two cases are identical. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbon, and the rabbis taught, Chasidim Harishonim, the early pious individuals, Hayu Matzniim Kotzoseim, Uzuchuchyoseim, Mesoch Sadoseim, they would take their thorns in their glass and they'd bury it into their fields, Umamikim Lahem Gimel Tvachim, they would put it 3 Tvachim deep in the fields, Kadei Shelo Ya'akev HaMachrisha, so that way it wouldn't hinder the plow. And the Gemara continues, Rav Sheshes Shadil Hu Benura, Rav Sheshes would take these items and throw them in the fire so they wouldn't cause any damage. Rava Shadil Hu Bedigla, so Rava would throw them into the Tigris River so they wouldn't cause any damage. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Haiman Deboyle Mahave Chasida, somebody who wants to be righteous, Lakayim Mili de Nezikin, he has to fulfill issues that are related to Nezikin, that are related to damages. That's something that you do to be pious, to avoid damaging others. Rava Amar Mili de Avos, Rava says the person should fulfill the ideas in Meseches Avos, in Pirkei Avos, V'amrila Mili de Brachos, and some say the person should fulfill the ideas that are relevant to Brachos, to the blessings. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamotzi as Tivno v'kashal Rishos Harabim, if someone takes a straw or his hay out to Rishos Harabim, lizvolim, in order to turn it into manure, v'huzak ben acher, and somebody is damaged by them, chayev b'nizko is chayev for any damages. V'chol hakodem behen zoch, and anybody who takes that for himself is able to be zoche, is able to take possession because they were placed in the Rishos Harabim. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Kol ha'mekalkelim Rishos Harabim, anything that causes damage in Rishos Harabim, v'hiziko, anything that can cause damage and it causes damage, chayav and l'shalim, they have to pay again for any damages. V'chol hakodem ben zoch, and anybody who takes it, they are zoche, they can become the owner. If somebody turns over the dung in Rishos Harabim, this was quoted earlier, and somebody is then damaged by it, chayev benizko, so he is chayev in the damages. And Rashi explains Lizavolim, again he takes out the straw and the hay for Zavolim in order for it to be manure, Sheyirkuvu Hateven Vakash. He essentially wants it to rot, Venasim Zevel, and it turns into manure, Lazavel Sada Sukramim, they can use it in the fields and the vineyards. And then Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said, Kol HaMekalkelim Rishos Harabim, the question is, what's Rav Shimon ben Gamliel adding? He seems to be saying the same thing. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Shami l'Tanakama de lo kones el shivcha. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel heard the Tanakama say that fine only applies to the Shevach. The Shevach is the improvement. Aval gufalo, but the principle it doesn't apply to. Kediktani bebraisa begemara. This is going to be taught in the Brais and the Gemara. The Rav Shimon ben Gamliel lememer, and Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is coming to say the guf nami kol hakodem bozacha, that when it comes to the principle also, anyone who takes it is able to become the owner. Lishna Achrin, another version to understand Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, kol hamekalkelin va'afilu osen b'rishus, all mekalkelin, even if people are doing this with rishus, as we said earlier, sometimes you have permission to put things in the Rishos Harabim, but still again, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says chayav and l'shalim, you have to pay, and anyone who takes it can become the owner. And the Gemara says, Lema masnisin delok Reb Yehuda, let us say that our Mishnah is not like Reb Yehuda. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Reb Yehuda Omer, Reb Yehuda says, B'shas hotzas zavolim, Adam motzi zivlo l'Rishos Harabim, at the time that a person is taking out the manure, when people are doing that in general, so a person is allowed to take his manure out to the Rishos Harabim, v'tzovro kol shloshim yom, and he's able to let it accumulate for 30 days, kadei sheyeh nishuf b'raglei adam of raglei behema, that way it gets stepped on by people's feet and by animal feet. Shal menaz kein hinchel Yoshua esaretz, it was on that condition that Yoshua gave over the land to the people. That's one of the conditions of the public spaces of the land. Rashi says, Kol shloshim yom rashai lanichon sham, again you let it accumulate for 30 days. Shal menas kein shlu yamakpidin al kach, that's not something that we're strict about, that's part of the condition. And so it seems like our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda, because our Mishnah says you're responsible for these items that are put into the Rishos Harabim. And the Gemara continues, Afilu Tamer Rabbi Yehuda, you could even say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Moder Rabbi Yehuda shem hizik meshali ma'ashe hizik. Rabbi Yehuda admits, he agrees that if there is damage that is done, you do have to pay for the damage, even though you have permission, but you still have to pay for the damage. But the Gemara says, Vatran, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'ner Chanukah pater? Rabbi Yehuda said, let's say a person puts out the ner Chanukah, the candle of Chanukah, and then it causes damage, he's pater, mipnei shehu b'rishos, because he had permission. Apparently when you have permission, you're pater, not chayiv. And the Gemara says, my la mishum rishos bezin, and doesn't that mean you have permission from the courts, just like our case? The Gemara says, lo no mishum rishos mitzvah. What it is over there, it's permission that it's a mitzvah. If it's a mitzvah, you're pater. But just because you have rishus, you have permission from the bezin, that does not mean you're potter. Titanias we learned in a brayser. Rabbi Yehuda says, B'ner Chanukah potter, mipnei shehu rishus mitzvah. By Ner Chanukah, there's a special patur, because there you have a rishus, because it is a mitzvah. Rashi says, Ma'ila mishum de rishus bezdin, hiniach b'chutz mishum pirsumei nisa potter. Originally, the Gemara thinks it's a pirsumei nisa idea of rishus bezdin, and then the Gemara says, not rishus bezdin, it's rishus mitzvah. Rashi says, Kolomer mishum rishus bezdin, the mitzvah miftar, avol b'rishus bezdin, the lav mitzvah chayiv. If it's a rishus bezdin and it's a mitzvah, so then you're potter. But if you just have rishus bezdin, but it's not a mitzvah, you would not be potter according to Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara continues to Hashma coming here the following proof: Kolelu sha'amru mutarin lekalkel b'rishus harabim. In all of these cases where we say you have permission, you're allowed to put these things into the rishus harabim. Im hiziku chayavin l'shalim. If damage is done, so they have to pay. That's the opinion of the Tana Kamma. For Rabbi Yehuda potter, but Rabbi Yehuda says potter. Apparently Rabbi Yehuda is saying, not like our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda is saying if you have permission, you're actually potter. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman says, you could still say our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, Mas Nisan Shalo B'Shas Hotzas Zvala. Maybe our Mishnah is talking not at the time that people have permission to take out the manure for Rabbi Yehuda, and then you could say our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda would say you're chayiv in that situation. Rav Ashi says, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Amud Beis.